Welcome everyone to the Board of Commissioners for Thursday, June 25th. We have a pretty extensive agenda today, so I'd like to get started. Wayman, can you read the guidance?
Sure, yes. Pursuant to Governor Whitmer's Executive Order 2020-129, the Kent County Board of Commissioners, in order to protect the public health, will conduct this meeting via electronic communications. Any member of the public wishing to listen to the proceedings or provide public comment may do so by using the following internet connection or phone numbers and passcode, which is also listed on the screen on the agenda. Any disruptions during the meeting by using offensive language or actions will cause one to be muted or removed from the meeting. There is an email address for public comment at kentcountymi.gov at the bottom of the agenda.
Great, so we're going to call this meeting to order. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioners Vaughn.
Here.
Antor. Commissioner Antor. Again. Commissioner Morgan.
Here.
Commissioners Jones.
Here.
Vice Chair Steck.
Here.
Commissioners Ponstein.
Here.
Voorhees.
Present.
Tallman.
Here.
Breevy.
Here.
Teal.
Here.
Sparks.
Present.
Melton.
Present.
Hennessy.
Present.
Tatlin.
Present.
Bulkowski.
Present.
Womack.
Present.
Wooden.
Here.
Skaggs.
Here.
Chair Bolter.
Here.
Madam Chair, you have 18 members present and 1 absent. You have a quorum.
Great, looks like we're getting a little feedback on the audio, so if everyone, just remind everyone to mute except for Commissioner Melton, who will give our invocation today.
Thank you, Chair. Division, disease, despair. These seem to be the daily specials we read in the news and all over social media. Our nation is divided by racism and politics. There are over 120,000 families in America experiencing the loss of a loved one in just 4 short months due to COVID-19. And too many people have lost their jobs and businesses. When we come together as a board, we are not here just as individuals representing ourselves. We unite as officials elected to serve all people living in Kent County, not just those that voted for us. We have an opportunity every time we meet and vote to model positive behavior and to make decisions that will impact all persons in our county. It is not about us or a few. We are elected to serve all. To quote Jane Goodall, "You cannot get through a single day without having an impact on the world around you. What you do does make a difference, and you have to decide what kind of a difference you want to make." Today, more than any other time that I can remember in my lifetime, we need empathy, understanding, joy, and hope. Thankfully, we have a God who never fails, who openly invites us to share our burdens with Him. He gives us the strength necessary to reach outside ourselves, to offer help and understanding to our neighbors. God's promises and faithfulness give us hope for each new day. His love and pure goodness fill us with joy. He helps us to open our eyes and hearts to see the beauty that surrounds us all the time. When we seek His wisdom, He helps us to see others as He sees them. All are created in God's image. He is always with us, walking beside us. His love can overcome all division, despair, and disease. I will end with very simple yet profound words from Mother Teresa. I alone cannot change the world, but I can cast a stone across the water to create many ripples. Yesterday is gone. Tomorrow has not yet come. We have only today. Let us begin. Father God, we are a broken and hurting people, yet we continually have hope through you and the power of your love for all of us. Please guide each of us commissioners to lead by example, not by our will, but yours, and help us to serve others with humility and justice, just as your own Son modeled during his time on earth. Empower us with boldness to do what is right and to speak out against injustices. You are a God of goodness, light, and love. Please, Lord, help us to share these things with all we encounter. Amen.
Amen. All right, we are on to the Pledge of Allegiance. Do we have a flag? Great. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty
and justice for all.
All right, we are on to item 5 of our agenda, special order of business. I can see the screen again. And I will call on Steve from Raymond Robson to give our comprehensive financial annual report.
Good morning, everyone. I am prepared to share my screen. It looks like whoever has the screen now will need to relinquish that for me to do it, and we'll put the audited statements up for everyone. Give it a moment to come through, and if you'd confirm you can see it, I'll proceed.
You can see it.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for having me at the meeting this morning. Again, my name is Stephen Bland. I have served as the county's auditor for the last several years, and I'm pleased to be here today to report on the results of the December 31st, 2019 audited financial statements. Ordinarily, if we were meeting in person, we would have hard copy reports we'd be passing around. Our access to printing facilities is a little different these days, but we'll work through the electronic copies now and make sure that hard copies are appropriately distributed when we are able to do so. As has been the past, or has been true in the past, we have 3 different reports that I will be presenting to you today. I'll keep it fairly high level and then be very happy to answer any questions that the commissioners have for me. The first report is the comprehensive annual financial report. What you're seeing electronically on the screen on the left is the inside cover of that. The county always produces its own kind of prettier outside cover that you'll get to see on the final document. The document on the right is the single audit report. That is the separate report that's issued on Kent County's administration of federal grant programs. And then when I've gone briefly through each of those, I'll switch gears to the smaller letter that we provide to the Board of Commissioners each year, which informally is called the management letter, but is actually addressed to the council, and it's considered the required communication, or rather the commission, and it's considered the communication with those charged with governance. So the elected officials overseeing the operations of the county. And the purpose of that letter is to just recap how the audit process itself went and to bring any minor comments or recommendations to your attention. So with that overview, I'm going to maximize the CAFR and see if I can't zoom in on it a bit and make it a little easier for people to see on your screens. Several of you have heard this introductory speech from me a few times over the years, so apologies for the redundancy for those of you who have. For everybody else, I just want to point out a few high-level things about what it means to produce a comprehensive annual financial report. The state of Michigan requires every local government to produce what they call basic financial statements. And it's really the core of what's in a comprehensive annual financial report. There are a handful of governments that have elected to go above and beyond that requirement. The financial section, which would contain what the state of Michigan requires, and include an additional introductory section beforehand, which provides management's take on things, and then a very detailed statistical section that follows that financial section, which provides 10 years of trend information. Any single financial year is going to tell a part of the story, but multi-year trends really provide the full story. And Kent County has a long tradition of preparing this comprehensive report voluntarily and has submitted it for review by the Government Finance Officers Association and has a long track record of receiving the Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting. It's important that you be reminded that periodically. It puts you in a fairly select group of governments who have taken that extra step. If you look within this fairly lengthy table of contents, you'll see that throughout this document, it's almost 250 pages long. There's only a couple of pages that we as your auditors are directly responsible for. And that's what's found at the beginning called the Independent Auditor's Report. Essentially, everything in this document is the representation of the county's management team. All of the financial data comes directly from your books and records. While we certainly assist in the mechanical process of pulling data from your computer system and putting it in the format required for a CAFR, it is very, very detailed reviewed by county personnel, and ultimately they sign off on a letter saying, yes, these are our numbers, county management taking responsibility for them. So what's our job then related to the audit? I'm going to jump to the Independent Auditor's Report to talk about that right now. We indicate that we've audited the accompanying financial statements and that management is responsible for preparing those financials and for all of the information that's contained in them. Our responsibility then is to express opinions. And what that boils down to is answering a very simple question that takes many, many weeks of effort to get the answer to. And that simple question is, the 250 pages that follow, all of the documentation, all of the numbers, all of the financial information in this report, is it reliable? Is it something that you as elected officials can use to make good, solid decisions? A clean or an unmodified audit report is not a value judgment on whether the county had a good year or a bad year. It's a value judgment on whether the financial information is accurate, whether it's reliable. Now, the audit speak we use for that is free of material misstatement, which means that we have looked specifically to find any errors that might be big enough to impact your decision-making process. But we have issued here, and I'll get to the paragraph that shows it, a clean opinion that, in our opinion, the financial statements do present fairly in all material respects the financial position of the county's various opinion units. We do note that there was a new financial standard that was implemented during the year, and I'll show you that when we get to it in just a moment. I'm going to jump to page 40 of the report, which is the balance sheet for governmental funds, and I'm doing that specifically to illustrate a point. We talk about the financial statements being free of material misstatements or being fairly presented in all material respects. What we mean by that is amounts that would impact your financial decisions. So let's look at the very first number that's in the financial statements. The very first number is the cash and investment balance for the county's general fund. And it's reported that as of December 31st, 2019, that amount was $81,151,918. Now let's say, just for the sake of argument, this is entirely hypothetical, but for the sake of argument that the audit determined that that number, while reflected in the county's books, was not correct. If that had happened, let's say, for example, the audit detected that the actual cash balance should have been $81,150,918, a $1,000 difference. Now, certainly, you or me as individuals, we would absolutely feel the pinch of $1,000 disappearing from our personal financial records. But from the county's perspective, with a nearly $200 million general fund budget, $1,000 is really not a material amount. We're going to call that $81.1 million either way. So an audit's designed to look for items that we would call material, but we're going to tell you anything we find, big or small. It's just important to remind each of our clients each year that there's always the possibility of smaller items slipping through an audit undetected. There's no reason to think that's happened. We've designed our audit using statistical models to provide a very high confidence level, but it's a normal limitation of the process, and it's only fair that we remind you of that each year. With that brief overview that it's a clean audit, we believe the financial statements are fairly presented. I want to point out just a couple of very quick financial highlights, and then we'll move on to the results of the other two reports, and then I'll come back and give you an opportunity to ask any detailed questions that you may have. The general fund ended the year with a total fund balance of just south of $81 million. That's the total fund balance line here. That is a very healthy place for the county to be. And one question that we're asked almost without fail is it enough? Is it too much? How much should we have in our general fund? And honestly, there is no simple answer to that question. In fact, my answer is almost invariably, it depends on what your own internal policy is, to which most of my governmental clients stare at me blankly because they don't have a policy. Fortunately, Kent County is not in that boat. You actually have a very well-defined general fund balance policy, and you have set aside a two-pronged approach. You have formally committed an amount equal to 10% of the subsequent year's budget to be reserved for catastrophic events greater than $1 million with very prescriptive requirements all laid out in a budget stabilization plan. That makes up $27 million of your total fund balance. In addition, you have a policy setting a minimum fund balance for budget planning purposes, where the total fund balance, that's inclusive of the $27 million I just mentioned, needs to be at least 40% of the subsequent year general fund budget and for expenditures and transfers out. Now, these audited financial statements focus on 2019, not 2020, and so the amounts may have varied slightly, but if I use 2019's budget as a proxy, that works out to about $190 million for budgeted expenditures and transfers out. 40% of that is about $76 million. So I'm sure that management could give you the exact figure, but you can see at just under 81 million compared to right around 76 million, you're just a little above that minimum fund balance policy. And the question, a fair question to ask is, do we really need that much? And the answer for a calendar year county is a very strong yes. And it has to do with the timing of your revenues. When you think about the timing of property taxes, that the primary levy for the general fund is not even levied until July 1st. The tax bills are then not due for a number of weeks after that, and then collection periods take time after that. A very substantial portion of the county's fiscal year has elapsed before the most significant revenue source is collected. And of course, I'm sure you've all heard the state is looking this year, especially with relation to COVID-19, at potential deferrals on property tax dates. And so all the more reason to need a healthy cushion to get through the early parts of that fiscal year. So the county does certainly appear to be in a healthy position, and that's exactly where you'd want to be able to weather those uncertain times that may be ahead. I did mention that there was a change in an accounting standard that was adopted this year. It impacted what is referred to as the fiduciary funds, and that's back on page 56 of the report. Historically, there was a column here that was called agency funds. Those agency funds have now been narrowed and redefined. Some of those dollars that the county has historically held have needed to be moved to other funds in accordance with this new standard. And those that remain are now referred to as custodial. In either case, what it boils down to is the act of the county holding on to money for outside parties. You have the programs that you are responsible for running yourselves, and those are run through governmental or proprietary funds. And then you have those situations where you're holding money for outside parties. Classic example would be any taxes that are collected by the county that are actually not county taxes, but are being collected on behalf of the state or behalf of community college and things that would need to be remitted to others. Custodial funds account for that. As part of adopting this new standard, custodial funds now for the first time report a net position, and that just reflects any amounts that the county is holding that don't have a prescribed repayment date. So with taxes, if you collect them for other governments, there's a calendar pre-established by the state that tells you when you have to remit that to others. Those continue to be reported as liabilities. Amounts that you are pending instructions on how to disperse now dropped to net position. So it's a change that all governments throughout the country will be making over the next year. You have this one behind you now, so it's one less thing to work through. County staff were very helpful in getting through the conversion. It's a substantial amount of effort to make that conversion this year. And in fact, that reminds me of something I should have mentioned earlier, and I'll just take the opportunity now. As everyone can imagine, this was a very unusual audit cycle. Our fieldwork would ordinarily begin in late March and run through early June. And if those dates sound familiar, it's because they coincide with the governor's stay-at-home order. And just about the entire audit was handled remotely this year. We had very, very limited on-site interaction with staff. And yet this audit was issued on June 8, which was on schedule with previous years. That is absolutely a testament to the hard work that county staff did, trying to adapt to a new work environment, trying to keep up with the additional demands of COVID-19 requirements and still get the audit out on time. We just really want to express our thanks to the entire fiscal services team and for the hard work that they did. I'm going to set the CAFR aside just for a moment and switch gears to the other two reports and then hand it back to you for questions. This is the single audit report that I'm now bringing up. It contains a multiple of reports from us as your auditors. One is an opinion on the list of federal grants you administered. One is a report on the system of internal control that the county has for its financial operations. One is a report on the system of internal control the county has for running grants. And then finally, the one-page wrap-up of any findings or question costs. Now, I'm sort of a bottom line person, so I'm going to drop right back to page 14, which is a great summary of the audit. And this is just solid good news from top to bottom. We issued an unmodified or clean audit opinion. We had identified no material weaknesses, no significant deficiencies, and no non-compliance relative to the financial statement audit or the single audit. All the programs came back clean this year. There were unclean, unmodified findings on each of the 4 major federal programs that were selected. These 4 programs represented at least 20% and probably more, I don't have the math in front of me, of the roughly $30 million that the county administered this year. Every year we pick different programs on a rotating basis and dig in deep on the compliance requirements related to those grants. And when I flip to the next page and you see no reported financial statement findings, and the page after that with no reported federal award findings, that is absolutely top-notch news. There had been a few findings reported in the prior year, and there is a summary that indicates each of those were resolved in 2019. So you'll find each of those prior findings followed up on and taken care of. So a great single audit all the way around. And finally, the letter, the communication to those charged with governance. This just walks through how the audit process works. It recaps our job as your auditors and management's job in preparing the numbers. On the next page, it indicates that even despite COVID-19, the entire audit happened under the original plan and timing that had been laid out. We indicated that there was a change in accounting policy, and that was the adoption of the new standard issued by the GASB, but nothing else that needed to be identified. There's the standard disclosure each year that audited financial statements by necessity do include some estimates. You have to estimate how long your capital assets will last in order to depreciate them. You have to estimate which capital costs will ultimately pass your thresholds and be capitalized. You have to estimate certain information for your pensions and OPEB liabilities. There's a long list of them. All of the estimates were reviewed and all of them appeared reasonable to us. We encountered no significant difficulties during the audit. I always feel bad having to put the negative disclosure in there, but it's good news to hear everything went smoothly. And there were no material misstatements identified as part of the audit that needed to be corrected this year. So really just great. We do then have an attachment that has our nickel and dime recommendations, what we kind of informally call the management letter. We have just a couple of comments for you this year. One related to the timing of capital asset cutoff. We indicated that that was one of the estimates included in the financials. And basically, when you have a large project that spans fiscal years, it's not always easy to tell in advance if a project is going to rise to that threshold and need to be capitalized. Just encouraging a little more care to watch for that. We found a few items in 2019 that had been started in 2018 and didn't get capitalized in process. It was fixed in 2019, so everything's right by the end. But just add that to the year-end checklist to double check that there's nothing currently in process that maybe should be capitalized in advance of being completed. There were subrecipient payments for the Continuum of Care grant. That was a finding we had pointed out in the prior year. The fix for that was made in early 2019, and so by year end, this issue had been resolved. We have no further recommendation, but because the condition didn't get fixed until partway through the year, some of those prior year findings did exist in 2019. We're just required to point out that happened, but hopefully this finding makes it clear that the improvements made in the process by the end of the year, we believe were sufficient to resolve that going forward. And then finally, as we indicated, the new standard, GASB 84, took a colossal amount of effort. We're confident that all of the material items were dealt with throughout the year. There do remain a handful of smaller accounts, things where the county is holding funds for outside parties where complete reconciliations are not yet available. County management has a good list of those, and they, as I said, work through all the big items. There's still a punch list of some smaller items for them to work on through 2020 so that we'll have that fully buttoned up for the future. And that's my relatively quick overview. Happy to hand it back now for questions and go into any additional detail that would be helpful for you.
Great, thank you, Steve. Always a great presentation, always very thorough. We're very thankful for all of your services and very happy to see that we had such a good audit. So with that, it looks like Commissioner Wooden has a question. We'll start with him.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a few questions. The first one, I realize your role is auditing previous year, but in your review of other financial statements and the general economic forecast or layout, do you have any expectation of what county governments like ours that have similar streams of revenue and financial count, can you anticipate how much we should expect in a revenue reduction, at least in local tax revenue? Revenue sharing is a whole nother ball of wax, but do you have any inclination?
This has been the subject of a lot of discussion, and I wish that I did have the crystal ball that we would need for that. But as you can imagine, there are so many moving parts. Trying to anticipate what will happen with actual taxable values, what will happen with state shared revenue, as you indicated, a huge one. One big item that I will point out that gives me, I'll say, a glimmer of hope that things might not be as bad as they otherwise would be, is that the federal government, through the CARES Act, has provided substantial amount of money through the coronavirus relief fund. And Kent County was one of the few municipalities in Michigan that was large enough to receive those funds. Unfortunately, the feds were a lot better about giving money than they were in identifying authorized ways of expending it. But the hope is, as more time goes forward, and I know Kent County actually has a project out now for evaluating this in great detail, we can identify a way to offset what would otherwise have been budgetary losses to use those funds. The specifics of that are woefully lacking at the federal level, and people are working through it. And until we're able to kind of resolve that, all I can say is I do expect revenues to be down, but I don't yet have a great feel for how much of that will be able to be offset through these other funding sources and what the bottom line impact will be for county governments. I wish I did.
Follow up to that. So you're saying, because that either was said differently and I didn't understand it when it was shared with me, you're saying that our county staff is currently examining ways to use CARES funding to fill holes in our own revenues? Because my understanding was, just through the COVID subcommittee, these were being used for specific COVID-related expenses that were not budgeted for.
And that's absolutely how the legislation was written. It said these funds are intended for incremental costs. However, at least from my analysis, and I should not be speaking as a surrogate for management, they'll have better information on this. But from what I have gathered from most places, the incremental costs of a COVID response have been dramatically less than the total funding available. And so the next step then is to look for ways to maximize the allowable uses of those funds beyond the incremental costs, which certainly are real. But for most governments, and maybe Kent is an exception, for most governments, those incremental costs were far less than the total pool of funding that should be available ultimately.
My final question is not necessarily related to the overall policy of our fund balance, but rather, as you mentioned, where our fund is currently as it lies with our fiscal policy. You said it was over. Do you know in real dollars how much we're over that current amount?
So the way the policy is written, it's based on the subsequent year's adopted budget. And as I indicated, this report only has 19's adopted budget, but assuming that 20's adopted budget is comparable, that worked out to roughly $190 million of budgeted expenditures and transfers out. 40% of that worked out to roughly $76 million, and the amount here is roughly $81 million. So assuming that next year's budget, or I should say next year, it's actually this year that we're now in, but assuming the 2020 budget was comparable, it's somewhere in the $4 to $5 million range above that 40% floor.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for Steve today? Any hands raised?
Mr. Talent.
Commissioner Taylor?
Thank you, Chair Bolter. Thank you, Stephen, for another great report. Like you said, I have heard quite a few of them and always appreciate the detail and the thoroughness. So
Thank you.
And like you, I'm kind of a bottom line guy, and I actually go down to page 128, and I wondered if we could do
Let's
that
do it.
for a minute. So I'm trying to kind of understand what happened, and you might have a better perspective on this, and maybe this is more a question for Jeff or Marvin, but what I'm seeing, you talked about the $5 million or so that we're above our fund balance policy right now. What I've been able to see from this information is that we improved our fund balance by 6.2 million approximately last year, which would mean that we were below our recommended 40% in the prior year. Would I understand that correctly? I have a vague recollection of that we were below our policy last year, and so now we're back above. Is that correct?
That certainly sounds reasonable, but we can just check the math for you real quick here. It wouldn't be a very good CPA if it didn't have a 10 key handy. So the final budget for expenditures, well, we'll use the original budget because that's how the year started. That was $142,825,149. I'm pulling that from about the middle of the page, total expenditures, original budget. And then transfers out was $43,369,811. So the sum of those was $186,174, and we'll multiply that by 40%. Your target at the beginning of the year should have been $74,469,000, and at $74,486,000, you were just above it. But it's entirely possible that those were final numbers after the math had been done the previous year, because when the budget was adopted, the year would have been in process of being closed, but not finalized. So maybe there were a few dollars that moved right at the end of the year last year.
Okay, well, that's helpful. The other thing is I'm trying to get a handle on what happened, and when I look at the numbers on page 128, and we look at revenue, and there's some significant differences from actual over budget, actual compared to budget, and then in expenditures also. Can you maybe give us a synopsis of what happened there? I see large numbers in parentheses for general government, public safety, and judicial, which is interesting. And taxes, we're within $500,000 there, but maybe just give us a sense of what happened that created that 6.2 million surplus last year.
Sure. So I'll give you a high-level answer. Obviously, you're going to get a better, more detailed one from county management, as you indicated. But on the revenue side, it's always good fiscal policy to budget conservatively and assume the low end of potential ranges. So taxes were initially budgeted at 98.1. As better information came in, that was amended up to 100.1 million. Actual 99.7 wasn't too far off. It's always kind of a moving target there. Intergovernmental revenue, that is a combination of state shared revenue, and then it can also be certain types of grants where the amount that you earn is based on how much you spent during the year. So in many cases, you'll see revenue and expense move up or down in tandem. And so it did come in a bit higher than expected. Same thing is true for charges for services, that more money ultimately was raised through the fees that are charged for providing government services. Interest earnings is always one that we encourage our clients to budget conservatively, because you never know what the market's going to do. This was a good year, and that contributed almost a third of the total gain here on revenues being $3 million higher than expected. So I'm sure there are a myriad of factors, but basically you budget conservatively and did better, and that's good news to be $3 million ahead. The same thing is true on the expenditure side, but it has a little more legality behind it. It's not something that gets talked about a lot, but it's technically a violation of state law for a local government to overexpend its budget. Bringing in too much or too little revenue, no harm, no foul. But overspending the budget is technically a violation that has to be reported to the Michigan Department of Treasury. Now, there's not a lot of teeth to that particular rule other than be careful and don't do that again. But because of that, it's very common for governments to set the budget on the high end and say, this is the maximum appropriation. A for-profit business, even a nonprofit business, might view the budget as a plan. This is what we expect is going to happen. A government has to view its expenditure as a legal appropriation of the maximum amount that's allowed to be spent. And then the goal, of course, would be to deliver the services, but to do so more economically. So it's not only a good thing, it's fairly common to see most governments target their budgeted expenditures to be here and bring the actuals in a little under. When the unexpected happens, you have a little bit of breathing room, and when it doesn't, and then you spend up close to that, then you're fine. So collectively, across a variety of programs, and for, I'm sure, a variety of reasons, we came in under budget, but that's really the only legal option. Going over wouldn't have been. So those savings were rather substantial, $9 million. You end up combining $3 million better than were expected and $9 million less than was expected to be spent, and you're $12 million ahead before you look at transfers. And then as we work our way through that, we ended up coming out all right on transfers as well. So bottom line, you were prepared to lose money, $7 million, actually came out $6 million ahead, and that's that $13 million delta there that ended the year strong.
I appreciate that. If I could, one more follow-up, and maybe
Sure.
this is something that staff can follow up with us on, but when you look at those expenditure numbers, and general government was, around 10% less than was budgeted, and judicial was 10% less, it immediately makes me wonder what contributes to that? What are the significant factors that contribute to that? Public safety is more probably like 3 or 4%, but those other two, that's a significant variance from what was budgeted. So it would be helpful to get some more breakdown of what are the most significant contributing factors to that.
Yeah, I would agree. Management should be able to do that for you. And one thing we've told a number of our clients as they're facing the difficult decisions ahead of needing to amend down budgets and having to cut things in order to make it work in a post-COVID economy is when you're going through that process, and it's always painful, look to see where you can first cut your budget without cutting services. And in many cases, that will be the kinds of issues that you're pointing out here, places where historical spending has typically fallen below the budget. You may be able to cut your budget without cutting spending, simply by knowing that there has been a little bit of padding there. But it will vary from area to area, the reasons behind it. If it's a staff vacancy that existed and has now been filled, that's not on the table anymore. But if it was some sort of major project that had timing issues and you can continue to defer it, you've got more flexibility. So it's a long, difficult process to work through COVID-related budget changes, but I'm sure the county's up to it.
Thank you.
We've got a pretty long agenda today. Do we have any more questions for Steve? I don't see anything in chat. I don't see any hands. All right, thanks so much, Steve. Have a great day. We appreciate your presentation today.
Thanks for the opportunity. Have a great day.
Great, thank you. Moving on in the agenda, I want to welcome our Sheriff, Michelle LaJoy Young, for her Sheriff's update. Michelle, take it away.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for taking the time this morning to talk a little bit. And, I don't really have a specific agenda item more than just giving a kind of a general overview of what's been going on with the Sheriff's Office and how the current community environment has impacted us. And then, as we talk through this, there have been several stages of this community environment, starting with COVID, and now we've had some community unrest, even a riot. And as we're recovering from those events, how we're building forward and making sure that we're doing everything to continue to build community trust. So I thought it would be good for us to have an opportunity to talk through some elements. I apologize first off, because it looks like you got a almost final version of my document sent to you. So I apologize for that. We will get a finally corrected document to you after this meeting. It doesn't change substantially, just a couple of wording adjustments. But we hear a lot right now about policy changes for police departments. And I just wanted to assure you that as the Kent County Sheriff's Department, We do not today, nor have we ever authorized chokeholds as a legal, non-lethal force. And that is very clear in our policy. We have several places in our training and policy that require an officer to attempt to de-escalate before the use of force. And this has been the subject of countless training events where officers not only have been instructed, but practice and are reinforced successful tactics. And we continue to put an emphasis on this. Without that training reinforcement, you can make any policy statement you want. The officer won't have the skills to do it. Our manual is specific to articulating a warning, if at all feasible, both when an officer is present or if any force of any type is going to be used. Obviously, we can all foresee circumstances where it's just not feasible, but where it is, it's required. And it is reviewed after the fact in our internal process. Our manual is specific, our officers have the duty to intervene. This is worded in multiple ways throughout our policy and code of conduct and has been trained and is instructed in our very first orientation meeting with our new officers. It has been part of our culture the entire time I've worked at the Kent County Sheriff's Office. That being said, we are also adding that policy statement to our use of force policy specifically, and then we will talk through it during your use of force training. And practice skill sets to gently guide the use of force interaction back and then down off the force continuum when the event de-escalates or can de-escalate. We also have in place a force continuum, as I just referenced, and comprehensive reporting. So really all of the initiatives that we are hearing talked about in the community are already addressed in the Kent County Sheriff's Office policy. But these events always serve it as a really good opportunity to have broader conversations and better understanding about the needs. And so we take full advantage of these opportunities and we look at our policies. And in fact, we had a group discussion yesterday with the vast majority of our command staff talking about how we can better understand and work towards training officers in the de-escalation tactics and the avoidance of use of force. I'm a big proponent of transparency. I hope you find that to be the case as we take opportunities, ask for opportunities to give information. I have to bring your attention to some of our performance measures that we've used and have talked about in depth with all of you. One of them is use of force on patrol. We monitor it every quarter. And actually in real time, we report it every quarter, and we even publish it as part of our performance measures. Specifically in 0.25% of all police interactions, is there any force at all? And so force would be defined, would be if you have to use force to get compliance to affect the arrest. So it wouldn't be necessarily serious use of force where somebody becomes injured or deadly force. It's 0.25% of times that any force is used. We have a specific reporting form. Anytime there's video available from a use of force, it's reported by a supervisor. There's a critique process. And it's even tracked by officers, so we can see if there's trending for a particular officer or if there's a particular shift that it appears to be on. So these are all things that we track very closely. We also have a statistic in our jail, and oftentimes when there is use of force on the street, or even just perhaps somebody is particularly agitated, they get to our jail sally port, we will get a call from that arresting agency for assistance out in our sally port to transfer custody. And in about 95% of those cases, our corrections officers are able to take custody of somebody who perhaps force has already been used on or that are not complying with the arresting officer. 95% of the time, they're able to bring them into the correctional facility and there's no use of force whatsoever with our staff. And we're able to de-escalate and allow for the safe booking and transfer of custody. So that's something we track very closely. We're very proud of that. our corrections officers actually have a little bit of a competition between shifts to make sure they're the best de-escalators. That's a good way to be. And I'm very proud of that culture. We've also published a strategic plan earlier this year. We've talked a couple different times about different components of it. And I just really want to point out the priorities that are in that manual that we will continue to work towards, that we will continue to report on. There are 4 priorities. Obviously, the first one for the sheriff's office is always going to be public safety. And, you know, that's going to be getting to the location of an emergency and having the ability to help. There are a number of other factors in that public safety priority, and I did submit a copy of our strategic plan so you can look at that in depth. But, you know, if we're not there, we can't help. And I would tell you, if we don't have the right skill set or the right training or technology or backup, we're not going to be able to help either. Our second priority was community engagement, being present in an effort to truly know the community we serve and be a resource to problem solve. And that problem solving has historically evolved pretty dramatically. And certainly within my career of 31 years, I've watched a change of how the community wants to be served. And, you know, I can say, one, we have an elected official head. That makes a big difference. I'm sure all of you get reach outs from the community all day, every day. I can tell you I personally do too. And I need to make sure that what we're doing is in support of what constituents want. But I also, there's a big change in what is effective and what the community atmosphere is, dictates what techniques we use, because old techniques become ineffective. And we need to be able to produce the results that we need, which is a safe environment, a comfortable environment, a happy environment for our citizens to work in, and that changes of how we get to that. So we try to stay very plugged in. This is something, it's a constant, steady pressure. Anytime we release and don't use as much time for community engagement, or perhaps aren't looking at new ways to engage or with new groups to engage with, we kind of fall behind on this. So this is really important for us to remember as one of our 4 priorities. This is important to our core mission. Effective and efficient services, you know, it sounds like a buzzword, but it isn't. It's what are we doing to make sure that we've leveraged all of our resources to be the best sheriff's department for all the people we serve, the entire community. So we evaluate that constantly. That has a lot to do with patrol districts or how many staff we have in the correctional facility. Frankly, what programs we have in the correctional facility, measuring how effective they are, measuring what groups we can put in those programs and how we can best serve those groups. These are all part of that priority. This is also where you would find our performance indicators in terms of use of force and is our training effective? Is our oversight effective? And are we doing what we need to keep our community safe and our officers safe? The last one's resource sustainability. And we've talked a number of times, our biggest resource is our staff. It's about 80% of the sheriff's office budget is staff. It's what most of our resources are. And this is a delicate thing. You have to constantly be on recruiting and developing the staff, making sure they have the right oversight, the right coaching to do what they need to do. And a huge component of that is making sure that they are emotionally prepared for the work they're doing. They are constantly barraged at the times they're working, and actually even off work, with decisions that they have to make, critical incidents that they're involved in, delicate communications that they have to participate in. And this isn't the kind of job you can come to half in. You need to be ready for work every day, which means you need a place, a mechanism to unload things when you've had a bad incident, or many bad incidences, when you're feeling like you're being criticized for every single thing you do, when you don't feel like you have the right skill set to do what you have to do. And frankly, sometimes as law enforcement, we just do the best we can with what we know. And so these are all very difficult things, and we continue to work to make sure we're supporting this staff in the best way possible. It's been a very challenging spring. and early summer for us, but I'd have to report that right now the morale is pretty high. The teamwork that I've witnessed with this group is second to none, and I have never been more proud to work for the Kent County Sheriff's Department, or particularly to be the Kent County Sheriff. Our staff is good. They're resolved to making sure they continue to serve this community in the way that this community needs and wants. And I'm just really, really encouraged. But there are a lot of things ahead as a law enforcement community, the broader approach, the national community and the state community. And we're going to have to stay very plugged into these conversations to make sure we're adapting and that the changes are the right changes and that the problem definition is the right problem definition. Because if we're not going in the right direction, we're going to be back in the community conversation again. And it's not a great place for anybody to be. So with that, I'm available for questions if you guys have any, or you have any thoughts that we need to take away from.
I'll give everyone a chance to raise their hand, but Commissioner Talon did put in chat. He's wondering if you had emailed this to us already.
I believe my assistant emailed it to Pam to be distributed. I'm sorry if you didn't get it. And if you haven't gotten it, we're going to correct the typo that I found before you get it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Commissioner Ponstein.
Thank you, Chair Bolter. Sheriff, thank you for all your work and your whole staff for the difficult job that they do on a daily basis. My question for any commissioners that want to see your officers in person, do you still offer the ride-alongs in this COVID-19 era, where if a commissioner wants to see firsthand how our patrol officers operate, are those still available?
I would say my general answer is absolutely yes. We have offered many opportunities for commissioners to ride along. My specific answer in regards to COVID is it would depend on the very specific COVID circumstance that we're in at the moment the commissioner asks. So right now, if you were to ask today and wanted to ride tomorrow, you would expect to have your symptoms checked. You would have to make sure that you are free of any COVID-related symptoms along with the officer. But I would say it's a higher risk time to do a ride along for all those reasons, because we're going to go where we need to go. We do have PPE to put in place when we have a known risk. However, as we all know, there are many unknown risks that a law officer would take in the pursuit of a ride along. So ride at your own risk would be the best way to say that.
Any other questions for our sheriff?
Commissioner Stack.
Commissioner Steck.
Thank you, Chair Bolter. Thank you, Sheriff, for your report, and thank you for your professionalism and sensitivity through these difficult times. One of the things that has been talked about in the last couple of years quite a bit is the CIT training. And I'm just wondering if you can just talk a little bit about the extent to which our officers at the department have gone through CIT training and whether we have accomplished our projected target for that level of training.
Absolutely. So CIT, for those who aren't aware, it's a training for mental health intervention. So if somebody's in a critical episode, an officer is called to the scene. Typically, that call would look like a disorderly person or perhaps a domestic, or sometimes it's known that there's a mental health crisis, but not always. It's often the behavior that's reported to us. So this critical incident training would allow an officer additional de-escalation strategies. It's specifically a week-long program per officer, 40-hour training, and it really needs to include mental health professionals from the community and also some other nonprofit professionals from the community, because it gives that officer a better understanding of the array of services where somebody could be directed to intercede in this particular incident. It's intended to be an alternative to actually taking custody of somebody or having to take them to an emergency room or perhaps the jail in some context. So it's a very effective strategy when it's in place in a community. We have been in pursuit of gaining full training for all of our officers for the last couple years. We are about 50 of our patrol officers. We have a number of corrections officers who have also had quite a bit of training. It's similar but different training for corrections for this program. I believe that's a 8-hour training, along with some other training they get as a corrections officers for mental health management. And then also our dispatch staff has received some orientations to CIT. So out of the patrol officers who need to get this training and who I'd want to get this training, we're about 50% through. And incidentally, there is legislation that's been introduced to make that part of a pre-service requirement for the academy. I think that's a great strategy. I would say that even with that though, you would need to augment it with the particular community that person ends up working in, and making sure that they're familiar with the strategies in place in that community, because they're not all the same, and it can really make a difference of what choices you make in terms of the outcome of that case.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think it's important for people to understand this is not just a 2-hour online class that officers take. This is a significant commitment. And I believe that those officers that go through that process report, it does have it's a shifting process. I mean, you really learn some very significant techniques and approaches to dealing with these sorts of crises.
Absolutely, and alternatives. And I think that's really important too, because there's times that as a law enforcement officer, you can't leave that person where you found them. And having resources available within the community to take and get that person help are really, really important, because the last place many of these individuals need to be is jail. And in many communities, it's the only place to take them outside of the emergency room.
We're working on that resource thing.
Yes, I agree.
Commissioner Wooden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For starters, thank you for your report, Sheriff LaJoy Young. I was especially glad to hear that several of the use of force restrictions that have been mentioned as potential reducing excessive force and as outcomes are already put in place in our policies, from banning chokeholds, warning ahead of the use of force, officers having a duty to intervene. Could you speak more on two things? One, describe more about the force continuum. I still am trying to understand what that means in full, and I'm sure several members of the commission or the public would like a little more information about what a force continuum is. And also, what is the accountability and enforceability? I realize you've already described the reporting process and how it's evaluated, but if someone has been hypothetically seen to have used excessive force, how is that put on the record? How are they disciplined for it? And is there a period in which the record of excessive force is then removed from their record after a period of a number of years? Could you describe a little bit more about the accountability and the force continuum, please?
I'm going to talk first about the accountability, and then I'll go back to the force continuum for a second. So when we do get a report of use of force, obviously, the first thing we're going to do is go back to the documented material that we have available. As I mentioned, if a use of force event happens, whatever that use of force event is, it's required that it's specifically documented on a use of force report. So it's separate even than our incident report. So it's not that somebody would have to go digging around for the fact that a reported use of force has been reported. We have it indexed. We review that with a supervisor long before there's even a complaint filed, typically, unless it's filed like immediately after the event. So we review the video, we'll review the written report, we'll review other officer statements. If there's statement of the subject involved in that report available, we'll review that. And we manage that officer's strategies first in a preventative way. But if we do get a report that there's been some kind of excessive force used, it becomes what we call an internal report. And that's an internal investigation. And I'd say it's similar in nature to what you would see if you were going to file an assault report, for example, on the outside, except for that it's all internally done unless the report, unless the complaint is a serious injury. And I would say like perhaps somebody who's hospitalized with significant injuries, or there's question whether or not they're going to live. Those are typically done by an outside police agency, and we would turn the entirety over to them. This wouldn't be something that we would even investigate. But if it's, a less permanent injury or substantial injury, we're going to do that review ourselves. If it's found that the person acts outside of policy, certainly they're going to be disciplined for that. We have an entire escalating disciplinary process. We don't have to start at the bottom rung, but we can start at the bottom rung, depending on the severity. But typically in a use of force, somebody would I would say suspension is a typical outcome. If somebody is found in violation of our use of force, we absolutely have terminated on the first incident of excessive use of force or wrongful use of force, which would be different. Termination is managed somewhat through an arbitration process. We do have unions, and if somebody is fired, terminated, then they can file a grievance. If they file a grievance, it would eventually be decided by an arbitrator. So those are all in place, but our decision typically wouldn't be the final decision of an arbitrator. We tend to have very good cooperation from our unions to use reasonable discipline. So I hopefully answered that question. And then all the laws that are in place for review of personnel files would still be in place for these types of incidences. We don't take it out of their file. There is an eventual time that an internal investigation, the full report of which would be on file, and we have a retention schedule that would dictate when that report is taken out of the system. I don't believe a use of force report is ever taken out. I'm looking to some others in the room when they retire, plus 5 years. Yeah, retire plus 5 years. So for a while, we have it for a while, but it can only be used as discipline for 2 years or 4 years, depending on the specific circumstance. And that's part of CBA, but it's also pretty normal standards in human resource law. So I hope I answered that question.
You did. I just had one quick follow-up. Is there anything in our policies that if a deputy is terminated for excessive use of force, is there anything preventing them from being rehired at a later date? Is there anything to either prevent that, or is there, on the opposite, is there anything in our either policies or union contract that still provides any advantage to that person being rehired at a later date?
Well, certainly not within our own agency. And there is now state law in the state of Michigan that requires us to report to an agency they may be applying to other than us, any circumstances of their termination, or if they quit, any circumstances surrounding their quitting. So there is already state law on that. It's been probably 2 years that I think that law has been in place. And I would say an agency like ours, we do have very extensive background. And I would find it incredibly unlikely that somebody would get within our ranks of having this history, because if they have previous law enforcement experience, we interview several people from their department. It's not just the one contact they put down. We'll go to their department, interview coworkers, interview the first line supervisor, the sheriff, or the chief. We interview neighbors of somebody who's going to be a police officer, to make sure that they're walking the walk that they talk to us about in an interview process. We're incredibly careful. It's not a small endeavor to bring somebody into a police agency, about $100,000 to get them fully trained and through that first year. So we need to guess right. And we do it based on a lot of data.
Thank you.
Chair Talon.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Sheriff, for your report and being proactive about some of the questions that commissioners and the community probably have. I want to note that you have been incredibly responsive and transparent with my colleagues and I want to express appreciation for that. Whenever I've gone to you, and I know many of my colleagues have gone to you, you've always been very responsive and very transparent about the Sheriff's Department, and very grateful for that and want to acknowledge it. I want to ask if you would also be willing to go the extra step of making some of the policies that you've referred to available on the county's website so that the public can see them, so that commissioners can see them, so that when we get questions, I know you prefer to have questions about the Sheriff's Department referred to you, but that we also get those questions, and that's an awkward position to send all of those to you. And if we could refer to information that is on the website, that would be helpful. So I'm thinking of things like the policy to de-escalate, labor contracts for officers in the Sheriff's Department, the cost of phone calls to the jail. I don't think any of those things are on the website, and those are things that are being discussed in the community all over and in our community. Particularly, we're seeing them discussed, well, obviously not the jail pieces, but they're being discussed in the city of Grand Rapids that I represent. So your thoughts about that? Thank you.
I also remember, Commissioner Wooten, I forgot to answer your force continuum question too, so I'll get back to that right after this. There are some of our policies, certainly summaries of many other policies that I would be comfortable with putting on the county website. There are obviously portions of it that I would be highly concerned about. So, but they're not all created equal. So I definitely could put some of the broader concepts that are in our policy on the website, and I could define what isn't there so that people have an understanding. And the cost of phone calls, I do believe, is posted, but we will have that fixed immediately if it's not, because it should be right now. So we'll get that done. Use of force continuum is a training model, is probably the best way that I could say. It's been in existence for about 30 years. I know it was brand new when I got to the sheriff's office. So about 30 years now, it's been part of our training model. And it really is a visual for an officer to understand the concept of force and what level of force is commensurate with the actions of the person that they're trying to gain custody of or compliance from. It starts with something as very basic as officer presence. And that's the first level of the force continuum. The fact that I'm on scene and I am managing the scene, that is the beginning of the force continuum. It then escalates up to verbal commands, and it will go all the way up to deadly force. And the strategies that are trained to officers are to be, if you will, one level above where the subject who you're trying to gain control over, where they are on that force continuum. So you try to just have incrementally one level above where that person is so you can manage the scene. When the subject gets ahead of the officer, let's say the subject's using deadly force and an officer is using intermediate force, obviously the officer is at risk for being killed. So we want to make sure the officer stays above. It's a training model. It's not really a policy so much as it's used to demonstrate where an officer needs to be, because there are a lot of other factors involved in that decision-making criteria. Did that answer that question?
I think that was Womack's question, or Wooden's question, correct?
Yeah.
Yes, sorry.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Commissioner Womack.
Yes, Sheriff, I just want to thank you for all that you've been doing during these times. I remember talking to you the day of the riot started at around 9 a.m. in the morning, and probably our last conversation maybe 1 a.m. the next morning, as you were very proactive in knowing that these peaceful protests might be infiltrated by third-party groups that might want to see violence, and also knowing that the GRPD needed backup. How many calls do you think your department handled that night in response to supporting the GRPD, making sure the city of Grand Rapids was protected, as most of the officers were engaged in downtown once the riots began?
Thank you, Commissioner Womack, and I do appreciate all the conversations we had. They were very helpful during the course of when that transitioned. So it was very nice to have somebody to talk to that was there and had some inside information. That being said, so initially when we were developing our assistance to GRPD, our intent was to be available to do calls for service for the city of Grand Rapids in the event their resources were all used in the downtown protest and potential if anything happened after the protest. So we put a bunch of officers on standby and told them to be available for service in the event that was needed. It became clear really about dark that we were going to need to have some available to do calls for service. So we started to call in staff. However, soon after that, it became an incident where GRPD was not able to contain the events going on in the downtown area, and we had to shift from doing calls for service to having an immediate response group down to the riot area. So I did send about 40 officers from this agency down to be assistance for security at the riot. And then beyond that, over the course of Saturday night, Sunday, and into Monday morning, we did all of the calls for service in the city of Grand Rapids outside of the downtown area. Over 200 some calls for service in total we handled. We handled with our full-time staff. We also have a pretty large, what we call traffic squad. They're reserve officers. They're trained in use of force and de-escalation tactics and some general law enforcement skills, but they cannot work independent of an officer. So we teamed them up as partners and they assisted us in handling these calls for service in the city. It was a great opportunity for our officers to help in the Grand Rapids community, and it was challenging, but they appreciated, GR really appreciated the help. We've received numerous letters from GR and the city staff, and we appreciated the opportunity to do it.
Well, thank you for being proactive. Thank you for supporting the city of Grand Rapids, because it's bad enough that a lot of property was lost, but my main concern was making sure that the organizers were safe and the peaceful protesters were safe, and the protection of life was there. And we did make it through the night without losing a life. So I'm very thankful to you, all law enforcement, and the peaceful protesters. One last question. When it comes to social media and law enforcement, specifically the sheriff department, is there anybody that kind of views that? Because around the country, there have been law enforcement who may be off duty, but might be floating Nazi signs or using racial slurs, and then the community has to bring it to the attention of the sheriff department or police department or the area media. Is there any training or policy about their social media? And I do believe in freedom of speech, but I know as a commissioner, and me being a talk show host and DJ also, I think a lot of times I still remember now that I do represent this entire commission, whether I want to or not, I do. So I'm careful not to insult our other commissioners by doing things that would make it seem like this commission, was not an upstanding board. So are there some policies, even when they're off duty, with respect to their freedom of speech, that they still represent our department?
Yes, absolutely. We have a section of our policy manual called Code of Conduct, and it really covers your conduct, whether you're on duty or off duty, as a representative of the Kent County Sheriff's Office, and the fact that you've accepted responsibility to be a public official by becoming a deputy. So it is covered in the Code of Conduct. We do have a specific social media policy that officers are trained on when they enter the door of the Sheriff's Office. They're also really highly trained about this topic during Police Academy. And we actually make them log into their social media accounts during their background process, so we can see what they've posted and what their history is. And we can go through it with them together to talk about those things that they may not have meant something negative by posting a picture with several beer cans in it when you're 18, but that it gives a perception of unprofessional, poor moral compass, those kinds of things. So we do talk to officers about it. I don't really have the ability to directly monitor every single social media account, but we do have several people who monitor as best as we can. And certainly if something gets brought to our attention, it's fair game to be disciplined on if you're posting something unbecoming of an officer.
Thank you very much, Sheriff.
And I don't see any other hands raised or any questions in the chat. So thank you, Sheriff, for your awesome service, your great report. I know that we all were getting questions, and I think it was a really timely report. So thank you so much for everything, and we appreciate you and the whole team.
So appreciate the opportunity to be here and the support we received from the commission. Thank you all for your thoughts and wishes.
Great, thank you. We are on to item 6, public comment related to agenda items. I did just check with Natasha. I didn't see any public comment emails. Wondering if we have any hands raised in participants. Looking now. Don't see
Nothing, Madam Chair.
any. Okay, we will go on to the agenda, and I'll call on Commissioner Melton.
Thank you, Chair. I move the acceptance of the consent agenda, approval of the minutes, and the Finance Committee meetings report.
Moved by Commissioner Melton, support by Commissioner
Support by Wooden.
Wooden. Questions or comments on the consent agenda? Don't see any hands raised. All right, Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Where'd I go?
She's muted.
Sorry. Yep, sorry, Madam Chair. On the motion to adopt the consent agenda, Commissioners Vonk,
Yes.
Antor, Commissioner Antor, Commissioners Morgan,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Vice Chair Steck,
Yes.
Commissioners Ponstein,
Yes.
Voorhees,
Yes.
Coleman,
Yes.
Breivy,
Yes.
Peel,
Yes.
Sparks,
Yes.
Melton,
Yes.
Hennessy,
Yes.
Talon,
Yes.
Volkowski,
Yes.
Womack,
Yes.
Wooden,
Yes.
Skaggs,
Yes.
Chair Bolter.
Yes.
Madam Chair, you have 18 yeas, 0 nays. The motion passes. The consent agenda is adopted.
Great, thank you, Madam Clerk. We're on to item 8 on our agenda, resolutions, and I'll call on Commissioner Talon.
Thank you, Chair Bolter. I move Resolution 60 for today, the appointment of Chris Smith to the Kent County Community Action Advisory Governing Board.
Second, Skaggs.
Moved by Commissioner Talon, support by Commissioner Skaggs. Questions or comments on this resolution?
Yes, this is Commissioner Steck.
Steck?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Bolter. Just want to underscore that this process, as we all know, involves an interview team and then processing this through the Legislative Human Resources Committee. We had a great cadre of candidates for this position. We had a great opportunity to go through that, and we're really impressed with the number of highly qualified candidates that were available to us. And Chris Smith is certainly an individual that rises to the top. So I heartily support his nomination and appointment.
Great. Any other questions or comments? I don't see any. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
On the motion to adopt Resolution 25-2060, Commissioners Vonk,
Yes.
Antor, Commissioner Antor, Commissioners Morgan,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Vice Chair Steck,
Yes.
Ponstein,
Yes.
Voorhees,
Yes.
Coleman,
Yes.
Breivy,
Yes.
Teal,
Yes.
Sparks,
Yes.
Melton,
Yes.
Hennessy,
Yes.
Yes. Commissioners Talon,
Yes.
Volkowski,
Yes.
Womack,
Yes.
Wooden,
Yes.
Skaggs,
Yes.
Chair Bolter.
Yes.
Madam Chair, you have 18 yeas, 0 nays. The motion passes. Resolution 6-25-2060 is adopted.
Great. We are on to item B, and I will call on Commissioner Voorhees.
Thank you, Chair Bolter. I would like to move Resolution 61 of today's date, a 2021 grant agreement, provider contracts, and appropriation from community corrections.
Moved by Commissioner Voorhees, support by Commissioner
Melton.
Melton.
Seconds.
Commissioner Melton.
Melton.
Questions or comments on this resolution?
Commissioner Talon.
Commissioner Talon.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to comment that all of these things, the grant agreement, the provider contracts, the appropriation, they all receive a thorough review at the Community Corrections Advisory Board, and enthusiastically support this motion. Thank you.
Great. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On the motion to adopt Resolution 61, Commissioners Vonk,
Yes.
Antor, Commissioner Antor, Commissioners Morgan,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Vice Chair Steck,
Yes.
Commissioners Ponstein,
Yes.
Voorhees,
Yes.
Coleman,
Yes.
Breivy,
Yes.
Teal,
Yes.
Sparks,
Yes.
Melton,
Yes.
Hennessy, Commissioner Hennessy,
I think she's been having problems with her.
Commissioner Talon,
Yes.
Volkowski,
Yes.
Womack,
Yes.
Wooden,
Yes.
Skaggs,
Yes.
Chair Bolter.
Hennessy. Yes.
Hennessy, yes. Madam Chair, you have 18 yeas, 0 nays. The motion passes. Resolution 61 is adopted.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We are on to Resolution 8C, and I'll call on Commissioner Breivy.
Thank you, Chair Bolter. I move Resolution 62 of today's date, Drain Commission request for proposal from the Drain Commissioner.
Moved by Commissioner Breivy, support by Commissioner
Sparks. Support.
Sparks. Questions or comments on this resolution? Don't see any. All right, Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On the motion to adopt Resolution 62, Commissioners Vonk,
Yes.
Antor, Commissioner Antor, Commissioners Morgan,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Vice Chair Steck,
Yes.
Commissioners Ponstein,
Yes.
Voorhees,
Yes.
Coleman,
Yes.
Breeby,
Yes.
Teal,
Yes.
Sparks,
Yes.
Melton,
Yes.
Hennessy,
Yes.
Talon,
Yes.
Volkowski,
Yes.
Womack,
Yes.
Wooden,
Yes.
Skaggs,
Yes.
Chair Bolter.
Yes.
Madam Chair, you have 18 yeas, 0 nays. The motion passes. Resolution 62 is adopted.
We're on to 8D now. Again, calling Commissioner Breeby.
Thank you, Chair Bolter. I move Resolution 63 of today's date to approve the Kent County Community Action Commodity Assistance Program appropriation related to the Families First Coronavirus Response Act from the Kent County Community Action.
Moved by Commissioner Breeby, support
Steck
by
supports.
Commissioner Steck. Questions or comments on this resolution? Don't see any. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On the motion to adopt Resolution 63, Commissioner Vonk,
Yes.
Antor, Commissioner Antor, Commissioners Morgan,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Vice Chair Steck,
Yes.
Commissioners Ponstein,
Yes.
Voorhees,
Yes.
Coleman,
Yes.
Breeby,
Yes.
Teal,
Yes.
Sparks,
Yes.
Melton,
Yes.
Hennessy,
Yes.
Talon,
Yes.
Volkowski,
Yes.
Womack,
Yes.
Wooden,
Yes.
Skaggs,
Yes.
Chair Bolter.
Yes.
Madam Chair, you have 18 yeas, 0 nays. The motion passes. Resolution 63 is adopted.
Great. We are on to 8E now. Calling Commissioner Wooden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move adoption of Resolution 64 of today's date to approve the Kent County Community Action Annual Action Plan and Appropriation. It comes to us from Kent County Community Action.
Moved by Commissioner Wooden, support by Commissioner
Steck approves.
Steck. Questions or comments on this resolution?
Yes.
Commissioner Melton?
Commissioner Melton? It's not on the resolution per se, but it is on the Community Action Group. Susan Cervantes and her team do such an outstanding job of very succinctly and very definitely and very in a way that is very transparent but understandable when they present things to those of us who are on that board. It is truly a pleasure to work with that team of people. Just a note.
Great. Commissioner Wooden. Commissioner Wooden? You're not moving. I think you're frozen. Commissioner Wooden, I'll try one more time. Any other questions or comments on this resolution? I don't see any.
No other comments.
All right, Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On the motion to adopt Resolution 64, Commissioner Vonk,
Yes.
Antor, Commissioner Antor, Commissioners Morgan,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Vice Chair Steck,
Yes.
Commissioners Ponstein,
Yes.
Voorhees,
Yes.
Coleman,
Yes.
Breeby,
Yes.
Teal,
Yes.
Sparks,
Yes.
Melton,
Yes.
Hennessy,
Yes.
Talon,
Yes.
Volkowski,
Yes.
Womack,
Yes.
Wooden,
Yes.
Skaggs,
Yes.
Chair Bolter.
Yes.
Madam Chair, you have 18 yeas, 0 nays. The motion passes. Resolution 64 is adopted.
Great. We are on to our last resolution, Resolution F, and I'll call on Commissioner Morgan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move Resolution 65. It's from the sheriff. It's a secondary road supplemental grant.
Support Commissioner Jones.
Moved by Commissioner Morgan, support by Commissioner Jones. Please mute. Questions or comments on this issue? No hands, it doesn't seem. All right, Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On the motion to adopt Resolution 65, Commissioners Vonk,
Yes.
Antor, Commissioner Antor, Commissioners Morgan,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Vice Chair Steck,
Yes.
Commissioners Ponstein,
Yes.
Voorhees,
Yes.
Coleman,
Yes.
Reevy,
Yes.
Teal,
Yes.
Sparks,
Yes.
Melton,
Yes.
Hennessy,
Yes.
Talon,
Yes.
Bulkowski,
Yes.
Womack,
Yes.
Wooden, Commissioner Wooden,
Yes.
Commissioner Skaggs,
Yes.
Chair Bolter.
Yes.
Madam Chair, you have 18 yeas, 0 nays. The motion passes. Resolution 65 is adopted.
Great. We are on to number 9 on our agenda, and it is public comment related to general county commission matters. Just ask Natasha if we have anything in the general email. It doesn't look like we do. I don't see any hands raised. Give it another couple seconds to see if anyone else has any public comment related to Kent County general matters. We'll have 3 minutes. Don't see any hands raised. Natasha or Wayman, anything in the email?
No, either in email or on chat.
All right. Great. We will move on to Commissioner reports, number 10.
Chair, my hand is raised.
Oh, Commissioner Voorhees.
Thank you, Chair Bolter. The words that I'm going to share this morning have caused me to have great thought and prayer and concern as we've watched what's happened in the streets of the cities of our nation and even to our own street here in Grand Rapids, where there were those who kidnapped, I would say, or commandeered those who would do a protest or an announcement in an orderly way. It got kidnapped and problems came about, but it came as they did that over the concern of law enforcement. And what I share with you today is what I've thought. I've shared with others about it, but it is nobody else's putting me to it or asking me to do something like this. But I'm really concerned about our city, our state, our nation, if we don't have the right connection between the people and our law enforcement. And so this morning I bring a bold idea that will take time and a lot of energy, but I believe it's very much worth it, something we need to do. And I go to the principle under which each of us hold our office, that we govern by the election of those that are governed. And so that principle is held great in our republic for many years, that from the president, the governor, to the mayor, to us as county commissioners, we serve at the will of the elected. We serve to the will of the people. So it should come the thing of law enforcement. We are all under the law. All of us who have accepted the U.S. Constitution as the basis of our law and the basis of our government, we are under the law. And I believe every person in America that is under the law, they should be the ones choosing who it is that's going to uphold those laws, make sure those laws are upheld. I believe it should be the people that are under the law. We should, as a community, be electing those that are in the final authority of upholding law. And so I move that I kind of go back to a little history lesson that Larry Stelma shared about some of our forefathers came from countries where the sheriff was an entity of the power that be. It could be the big property owner, it could be whatever power was in that place. And when people came to America, they said, oh, no, we're not going to have that. We're going to elect our sheriff. We are going to have a person who is accountable to us, not to, and in many instances where the law enforcement leader is appointed by the bureaucracy. I know I had the honor to serve as mayor for a time, and the mayor didn't hire or fire. The city council didn't hire or fire. We hired a city manager, and the city manager then did those kind of duties. I believe accountability needs to go directly to the residents, and the people can elect who they believe will fulfill that office in a manner that is accountable to the people, in a manner that is equity and fairness and all the issues that have been brought up by the legal protests around our city and around this nation. There are needs there that need to be met. Above all, needs to be a relationship between law enforcement, or those that are chosen to make sure that laws are upheld, and between the people, the public, and that person. And so I would move, not really move, because we don't make a resolution for. I would like an invite to the executive committee, Chair Bolter, and further discuss this issue, that all law enforcement in Kent County shall come under the authority and control of the elected sheriff of that time. And so I would just appreciate an opportunity to further discuss this issue and further explain my principles of going back to that we govern by the election of those that are governed, and we will select our law enforcement by those who are under the law. And so I'd like that invitation, please. Thank you.
Harold, you're invited to any table I sit at, so we will make that happen. We'll work with women to get that scheduled for our executive committee.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Bolter. Appreciate it.
Any other official reports before we get to miscellaneous? I think I got Commissioner Stack.
Thank you, Chair Bolter. Always problematic following my senior colleague, Commissioner Voorhees. So just a couple of items of report. First, Crisis Center Task Force met again in the last week, and I wanted to publicly acknowledge and thank Lori and our state advocate Becky Beckler for a lot of hard work in the last couple of days. Some of you may have watched at the Legislative Committee when we asked her to report on the status of House Bill 5832. I call it the Crisis Center legislation going through the House now, and it actually has now been approved. So this is an important piece of legislation that is critical to our efforts to move forward in establishing a crisis center system here in Kent County. So thank you, and thank them for that work. Also, report Network 180 Board continues to meet on a regular weekly basis. The Executive Committee at least meets on a weekly basis as we monitor our COVID response issues, which is an ongoing issue for Network 180 in the current environment. But we've also undertaken what I believe to be a commitment to a quantitative, data-driven conversation about the extent to which there may be disparities in how public health services, particularly our public health services, may be provided, and whether there are issues there that we need to take a harder look at. So just an early report on that conversation that is being undertaken there. Lakeshore Regional Entity also met a couple of key critical issues that are currently moving forward there. We are now renegotiating and re-engaging our partnership with the Beacon folks. Again, this is our private partnership with them as key providers of some of our essential services in the regional area for the administration of the funding for behavioral health services. That will continue over the course of the next month or so, and we'll see and hope for a positive shifting in that contract. At the same time, while there has been a hiatus in the process of negotiating with the state on the pending litigation between the state and the LRE, which is the regional PIHP, that is now re-engaging and moving forward, and so there will likely be some further discussions of a possible resolution coming out of our negotiations in the course of the next month. Then just quickly, workforce development also met, and my colleagues and I participated in that. Just an interesting note that while workforce, of course, is focused on the advancement, development, enhancement of our workforce, we had to commit a fair amount of our efforts to helping the other side of that process, the unemployment insurance, step in and process claims. And I'm really pleased with, while that's not their specific mandate, they stepped up to the plate in order to help out in trying to process the incredible backlog of unemployment claims. And I can't say that we've solved all that problem by any means, but at least contributed significantly to that. And then finally, KCCA also met the last week or so. And as we all know, there's a significant additional contribution of effort and funding that KCCA is having to take on to address some of the COVID funding issues. And they have looked at, again, to add some staff perhaps. And I also joined Commissioner Melton in acknowledging Susan for the incredible work in addressing all of the issues that we have to handle there. Thank you. End of report.
Any other official reports today?
Madam Chair?
Sure. Yeah, who's speaking? Commissioner Morgan?
Yes, just give a brief report on the airport. We're running about 15% of last year's volume, and the executive director, Tori, will be forwarding a quarterly report to my colleagues. So I just wanted to give you that update.
Thanks, Commissioner Morgan.
Madam Chair?
Yeah,
Madam
Commissioner
Chair,
Murray?
for a second.
Sure.
For a second time?
Yep.
I want to compliment Commissioner Melton for her thoughts and words and her invocation, and very thoughtful. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Melton.
And Commissioner Melton, unfortunately, has lost her ability to hear our meeting, so we will share that with her. I'm going to try to log back in, but I may have to call on someone else for a motion to adjourn. So, any other official commissioner reports today? I don't see any. We will move on to Commissioner Miscellaneous. Do we have any miscellaneous today? Any hands?
Yes.
Commissioner Wooden.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to bring this up since I was going to comment on it ahead of our vote on the Community Action Annual Plan, but I lost Wi-Fi connection. I just wanted to thank DCA for sending over the detailed information on those properties that we assisted with NSP funds from 2009 to 2013. NSP was a portion of funding given to through the Recovery Act. As I noted, as we've seen in some communities, homes that have been provided for home ownership and have used federal funds have often found their way into either becoming flips or rental properties over time once the affordability restrictions are relaxed. I was appreciative to see that has not happened in large part with these properties that are for whom those affordability restrictions have relaxed already. Certainly think we should pay more, we should keep paying attention to this. Obviously not every single week, but every year or so, seeing how these progress, both our home assisted and our NSP, will just allow us to, again, maximize the effect of these tax dollars. So thank you.
Any other commissioner reports today? I don't see any. No other hand, or I'm sorry, miscellaneous. We are on miscellaneous. I am trying to slow this meeting down. Miscellaneous, Commissioner Melton.
Am I on now finally?
Yeah,
I
we
had to
can
go.
hear you.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. Just two things, kind of a follow-up to my invocation. I have found over the last couple of weeks since we met before, I have made a concerted effort to reach out to constituents in my area and my friends who are persons of color. And it has been quite eye-opening to me to hear them all thank me just profusely for calling and just saying, hello, how are you? We forget, at least I forget too often, how easy a thing that is and what a difference it makes as an elected official, but also as a neighbor, as a member of our society and our county, because they're not okay. And what I am hearing is I'm feeling heavy. I am tired. I'm feeling out of sorts. I don't know where to turn. And so again, as commissioners, I guess I would like to suggest that we all do that, and show that really we put our, as my mom used to say, our money where our mouth is, that we don't just use the words, but that we actually put feet to what it is that we say. And the only other part of that is, again, just my absolute heartfelt condolences to the over 120,000 families who have lost a loved one in less than 4 months to this disease. And again, just a suggestion. I know Adam London asked us very definitely, as if we as elected officials and those who lead the county would model wearing a mask in public, doing the social distancing, those things that he has said are so very important. I personally find Adam to be of great integrity, and I respect him greatly. And I guess I will leave it at that. Happy 4th of July, by the way, to all.
Yes. All right. Looks like we have a couple more folks. Commissioner Bolkowski, do you have a question?
Yeah, Wayman, there was a post last week from a couple of the chambers of commerce, in particularly the Grand Rapids area Black businesses and the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. And then you sent out a response, I believe it was earlier this morning, or at least we got the copy earlier this morning. Can you comment on the process of the distribution of these COVID funds and what is happening or not? And
Yes,
so thank you, sir.
Yes, you're welcome. As of this morning, I got a report from the Grand Rapids Chamber of Commerce, who has been selected to help distribute these dollars with the county. As you know, we are responsible for the direct distribution of those dollars. We are very fortunate to have them take that on. They are reporting this morning that they have received 345 applicants so far. I can't thank them enough for how quickly they have responded within 10 days of the time that they recommended that they take charge of it for us. We have received several comments from some of the organizations that are getting the word out, that are doing the technical assistance. It's local chambers. One of the groups, the Asian Pacific Chamber, received a really nice note from them today as well. So it's from my standpoint, a very good process that we're running right now. I did send a letter this morning with an FAQ to the board. I will be sending talking points for you as well that gets at some of the issues, the points that were made in the letters received from GRAB and from the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. I believe that we are doing exactly like the federal government expected us to in regards to how we're managing this process. I don't believe that there's anything that we've done that's different than how we've managed over the course of this period, and I'm feeling very good about it. I believe that we're going to send a press release out to the public too, because we're getting feedback from different groups, organizations that are connected to the Hispanic Chamber. There was an article written in My Biz, I believe. So we're going to make sure that everybody receives the information that you all are also receiving. And again, I don't want to disparage either group this morning. I just want them to know that we understand where they're coming from, but there's a lot of inaccuracies in the information that they provided us. And I'm not going to get on a soapbox. That's just the way business is. It's nothing personal. It's just simply they're disagreeing with their process, and we're going to continue to support them. We did provide dollars for them for technical support, and I feel very confident that what we're doing is exactly what the crisis subcommittee had determined that we do. And I can stand by that all day long. So very, very thankful for the Chamber of Grand Rapids and what they're doing to help us with this process.
Wayman, you are sending out a couple documents to the board, right? Sorry if I'm
following this, I asked Sherry, we've got additional information that might help some of the questions, the assertions that were made in addition to the memo that I sent out or the letter that I sent that I copied you on. I think that'll clarify things even more. We've been working on this all night and this morning, and we're just very focused on making sure that you have the best information and the community. So we'll send that out to you. Maybe it's going out now as we speak. I'm not certain. I know Sherry Hall has been asked to send that out.
And I just want to speak to that for a minute, just to be sure that everyone understands that there was a specific methodology to how we had arrived at the number and trying to come up with agreements of and being able to, for all of our groups that are getting agreements with the county for CARES money that will be audited, we have to be able to demonstrate what specifically we're asking them to do. And so when you have already engaged a large organization and you really just need someone to communicate to different memberships what's being done, we're really just asking for partner and communication, and technology assistance was able to provide that to them for that reason. So I just want to be clear. I think Wayman's communication to you will help you understand the methodology of how we arrived at things. But I just want everyone to keep in mind that when we received this money, the concern was everyone needed relief like yesterday, like before we even started the committee. And so we needed to be able to partner with people that were ready to hit the ground running, because we had to take another 4 weeks for our process. So, we were getting surveys that businesses were going to close if they had to go another month, and we had to take another month to be somewhat deliberate. So I just want to be clear that decisions were made based on direct relief to companies who needed it and who could deliver that direct relief right away. So with that, Commissioner Womack, did you have a miscellaneous item? You're on mute.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just really want to say that the main concern when it comes to this CARES Relief Fund, which is making sure COVID-related financial issues are addressed and COVID-related health issues are addressed, that needs to stay number one in the community's eyes. When it comes to the different organizations, I don't favor any of the organizations. I support all of the organizations, but I still understand that we are working in partnership with each organization to best get to these minority businesses, all businesses, and including minority businesses. And we have not had enough time yet because those funds haven't been distributed. The information to just come to the Grand Rapids Chamber for them to go through these applications and start to put this money out. So I would just ask the public at large not to judge Kent County and the CARES Act until we have a chance to find out if the people we're using to get this money to the businesses really do it. And our decisions were based upon the formal requests that we had. And with the request that the technical assistance and the PPE equipment, I was very happy as being a minority on the subcommittee when I saw the chamber, the West Michigan Hispanic Chamber come in, grab another organization. I was very concerned that those that presented were given a fair shake, and seeing what was asked for as I watched those meetings, I thought that the issues had been addressed, but I just want to let those organizations know that the doors are still open, the phones are always open, and we can still have communications and see what we can do best to make sure those organizations and the people they serve are heard, and that we have a partnership. We have a partnership with everybody that came presented. Wayman has also, in the subcommittee, has also heard from BIC, the Black Impact Collaborative, that's been doing testing and tracing. So some of the myths that's on social media that we're not working with any minority organizations, that just simply is not true. And we are working with the Hispanic Chamber. We are working with GRAB. I just hope that if they want to send that to another level, they understand that that's what business, that's what intergovernmental affairs are about. Things may not happen, a seed may not happen on the first day, but you know what knows what happens on the 30th day. Let's just continue to communicate. Let's not bash each other in social media. Also, businesses that I have went to in Grand Rapids, I found some minority businesses that have not been approached. I've got minority businesses out there, and I just want to say that when I can find minority businesses that have not been approached and told about these funds that are coming out, we all have too much work to do to make sure these businesses are saved than to be out here bashing each other. But I understand the frustration being a minority. I understand the frustration, and sometimes we have to yell. Sometimes we have to go public. But with my experience and knowing what's going on here at the board, it just has not been enough time, period. I hope that a year from now, we can look back and say that we all who call ourselves leaders in this greater community of Kent County came together and did the best we could by the businesses. And we can only do that united and working together. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Womack. Commissioner Wooden, did you have a hand up or no?
Yes, I did. Sorry, my Wi-Fi apparently is just not wanting to behave today. So I just wanted to comment. I know that, you know, hearing that we now have 345 applications, funds will start to be assigned, if not disseminated. If I'm recalling correctly, the COVID subcommittee will be meeting monthly still to review the progress of all these initiatives. And if anything, if it's not going to be done already, I would just ask that the chamber report out breakdowns of these businesses, both by location, size, and minority ownership, or the race ethnicity of the business owner, as well as the gender, just so that we can review the progress, so that if we do find out in this first batch of applicants that there is a shockingly low disparity amongst our Black and brown businesses, amongst our women-owned businesses, that's something that we can find a way to correct in our policies. Because obviously timing is very important right now, but we also need to make sure that things are done in as intentional way as possible. I think that's the intention, at least as I've gathered, and would hope that we can continue to evaluate, and if we see problems, find ways to improve. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Wooden. Any other commissioner miscellaneous before we move on to
Jones,
this topic?
Commissioner Jones.
Yep, I've got that. Wanted to kind of stay on topic before we move on.
Commissioner Jones had a
Yep.
hand up.
I know, just a second. I'm looking at something in chat too. Okay, we will move on to Commissioner Jones.
Well, thank you, Chair Bolter. I just want to take a moment to add my thanks to Steve Duarte and all of his time, effort, additional effort into the county. I personally wanted to thank him for making me a better commissioner and a better chair of the Finance Committee. That is definitely the highest compliment that I can pay him. The conversations that we've had were all very helpful, and he will be dearly missed.
Thanks, Commissioner Jones. Commissioner Breeby.
I just wanted to echo those comments of Commissioner Jones. Steve Duarte has played a large role in the success of Kent County financially, and he's very knowledgeable. I'm really going to miss his the knowledge that he has and that he shares with us so quickly. There's nothing like it, but I appreciate his time here at the county, and I hope that he's able to kick up his feet and enjoy his years of retirement. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Commissioner Breeby. Commissioner Steck.
Thank you, Chair Bolter. I join in those acknowledgments. Mr. Duarte has been one of the stalwarts of the county for many years, and I think one of the reasons why we're able to enjoy such a good audit response we heard today is because of the foundational work that he has laid for this county, the standards that he has set for our financial activity, for the reporting, for the management. He has been clearly one of the backbones of our ability to maintain the fiscal responsibility that we've had over the course of the years. He will be greatly missed, and I want to thank him for all of his years of service.
Great. Any other commissioner miscellaneous? Commissioner Womack says thanks. Commissioner Talon says amen to all comments on Steve Duarte. Any other comments, questions, concerns, and miscellaneous? I just want to echo Steve, all comments. Steve, I hope you're reading my closed caption comments and all of our closed caption comments to you. I wish that we were in person to have a Dan Ponstein Costco cake and really celebrate you. And certainly this is not the send-off we want to give you. But we're so happy that you agreed to stay on for an additional 6 months with us. Told we may be able to continue to keep you around on a case-by-case basis. So apparently we're kind of like the mafia in that regard. You can never leave. So just want to say thank you so much, and we so appreciate you. And as chair, I really have a deep appreciation for you, and loved our trip to New York for the bond reading, and just treasure that time. It's one of the highlights of my career. So thank you, Steve, and we wish you well. All right. Can I get a motion from Commissioner Melton for adjournment?
I move that we adjourn subject to the call of the chair until Thursday, July 23rd, 2020 at 8:30 a.m.
Commissioner Melton, support by Commissioner
Coleman.
Coleman. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank
Good
you,
job,
everyone.
Coleman.
See you next month.